Hi there, my name is Jenny Parker, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer at American Promise. And this is our series, Beyond the Headlines, where we talk about the way money in politics is impacting American elections. As always, I'm joined by my colleague, Brian Boyle. He's our Chief Program Officer and General Counsel. And today, Brian, we're talking about one of my favorite topics. We're talking about us. We're talking about ourselves. And who doesn't like to do that? So what we're talking about is a recent milestone this movement hit, which is we have now 25 states calling on Congress to introduce the amendment solution. And I just want to get into a little bit about, is this just a symbolic milestone? What does 25 states really mean? But to kick us off, I want to ask a question about why states matter in this movement. If our amendment path that we're following is proposal by Congress, then why are we focused on the states right now?
Well, hi, Jenny. Good to see you as always. And yeah, I'll just say I agree with you that sometimes it is fun to talk a little bit about our work and our successes here at American Promise. So, let's just celebrate the fact that in the past couple of months, the number of states ticked up from 23 at the beginning of the year to 24 with Oklahoma's unanimous support. And then just recently, 25 states with Idaho coming on board formally in support of the amendment solution. And that's huge, right? It's half the country. It's a clear sort of threshold moment, I think, for this work. But to your question about, well, why do the states matter in this effort anyway, if proposal by Congress is ultimately one of the things we're working toward? I think it's helpful for any listeners or viewers to understand that many successful amendment movements in the past have also had a lot of their energy sort of bubble up from the states first. I think maybe one of the best examples of that is women's right to vote. So I think people think that the 19th Amendment created the right of women to vote, but actually in a number of states had already granted women the ability to vote in certain elections in the lead up to Congress proposing the 19th Amendment and then the states ratifying. And those states taking action first and the social movement that led to those state legislatures passing those laws, that helped to spur Congress to take action by the time they finally proposed the 19th Amendment. So we're using a similar strategy in our work at American Promise. And that's why these state level developments are so important.
Okay, that's so interesting. I think we also have an affinity with the 19th Amendment because it also addressed a Supreme Court decision.
That's right. Yes, it addressed a Supreme Court decision from the 1800s called Minor versus Happersett. And in that case, the Supreme Court found that there were no provisions in the federal Constitution that guaranteed women the right to vote. And the American people ultimately rallied together to change that, but it took a while. It took decades before the 19th Amendment was put into place.
It's so interesting. So let's drill down a little bit more into that number, 25 states. What does being at 25 states really do for our momentum and the case for the amendment solution?
So I think at just a very basic level, having half the states in the country is kind of like a nice shorthand way to share with people just how many states are already on board. But also, if you kind of look into the 25 states that have taken these steps, you'll see that there's geographical diversity. You've got, Maine, you've got Oklahoma, you've got Washington State, and there's ideological diversity. Now, of course, within states, there's diversity, political diversity, viewpoint diversity. But states do have legislatures that may tilt in one direction or another. So you have quote unquote blue states and quote unquote red states and purple states that have come together in support of this solution. So I think that's another really good signal of the momentum, because it shows that there's that broad cross-partisan coalition.
And from a congressional perspective, what does having a lot of states on board do for our congressional work?
Well, I think it affects our congressional work in several different ways. So jump in if you want to drill down on anything.
Okay.
I guess the first point would be around the spur that it might provide, or the impulse, or the impetus is a better word, for Congress to sort of get involved and take this up. Because as they see the number of states taking action, yes, it's a signal of the public support, but also there is a little bit of a political calculation that they may make about a risk in not responding to the activity at the state level. And I could give an example of that if it would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
So the 17th Amendment to the US Constitution is the one that provides for the direct election of senators. Previously, senators were chosen by a vote of state legislatures. And in the lead up to that, a number of states were passing resolutions and even potentially calling a convention of states to propose that amendment. And as the state level activity ticked up, it was one of the things that kind of prodded Congress to say, actually, maybe we want to draw up the language for this amendment ourselves. We want to take the responsibility, because maybe they were afraid of what might happen if it did come to a convention of states. Now, I think, as you, of course, know, and I think some of the folks that follow our work, they all know that our strategy very much is proposal by Congress. But seeing a surge of support in the states also can sharpen members of Congress' attention to, hey, maybe we better address this, or else they'll take it into their own hands.
So let's get to Idaho, our most recent win. Idaho is officially state number 25. Talk to us about that process and what it says about our momentum right now.
So first thing to say about the Idaho win is just how strong the support in both chambers was. These were overwhelming, I think virtually unanimous voice votes in the chambers. There was supportive activity in the committees leading up to that. And so I think it's important to note that, because it just shows how the level of support and the public opinion around this really is quite strong. The next thing I would say is that when you look into some of the reasons that were motivating the action in Idaho, I'd say two things kind of rise to the top. The first is what we talk about as federalism, or state sovereignty, state power. I think they just felt like, why shouldn't the states have the ability to make these decisions about money and politics? Why should we be leaving it to unelected federal judges? And there was also, I think the second thing was a real awareness and frustration with outside influence in Idaho's elections. They saw, I think, over $17 million spent in legislative races in 2024. A lot of that was new money in Idaho's system from outside groups. And that really, I think, opened legislators' eyes to how the influence from outside of the state can take the form of concentrated spending, and how that can undermine state sovereignty and the priorities of their actual constituents.
I want to get into what really happens with 25. Remind our viewers what we need in order to succeed with this amendment if we're going by proposal by Congress.
Okay, great. So there's two steps to amending the Constitution. Step one is proposal of the text. Step two is ratification of the text. proposal, our strategy is proposal by 2/3 of Congress, and that means 2/3 of the House and the Senate. So that's purely a numbers game based on who happens to be in Congress when proposal happens. Ratification is also a numbers game because you need 3/4 of all the states to ratify, which is 38 states. So we're not at 38 yet. We don't need to be, right? We don't need to get to 38 before Congress proposes an amendment, but getting closer to 38 is more helpful because it signals that ratification will happen very quickly after Congress proposes.
Okay, all right. And then ratification process. Simple majorities in most of the states?
Yeah, a couple things to say about the ratification process. So if Congress proposes the amendment, Congress can also actually specify how ratification would take place. Because the Constitution, Article 5, allows for ratification either by state legislatures, which as you pointed out, is just simple majority, each chamber votes, or ratification could happen by a state convention, a ratifying convention. That's only happened once in American history. Most of the 27 amendments were ratified by state legislatures. And a couple other things to just quickly note. Governors have no formal role to play in the ratification process, and presidents have no role to play in either the proposal or ratification process.
So related to all of that, one thing that I note when I look at the map of the states who have passed resolutions, just how different they are. I know our recent wins have been in Utah and Idaho and Oklahoma, but we also have a lot of blue states and purple states on the map as well. Remind us why that really matters when it comes to solving or really on getting an amendment passed. Why is that type of diversity so important?
Well, I think it has to do with the fact that amending the Constitution is a supermajoritarian process, right? Like we just talked about 2/3 in Congress, 3/4 of the states. I'd say very rarely, if ever, in American history has any political party achieved that level of dominance that they could amend the Constitution on their own. And so what that means in the 21st century, for sure, is that an amendment has to have support from both of the major parties. And going back to your question, well, why does the diversity of states matter? It matters because, as I said earlier, some of those states are blue states, some of those states are red states. It really gives people in both parties, this is a phrase I hear a lot, but a permission structure to support the amendment because they know they're not doing some crazy thing that other members of their party haven't already done.
Right. Okay. So talk to us about, well, let's pretend you're tuning in for the first time. Why does Money in Politics need this amendment solution? What does this amendment do?
Yeah. So pretend people are tuning in for the first time. Okay. Well, in a nutshell, the Supreme Court took a really wrong turn 50 years ago when it started to get deeply involved in campaign finance policy. And the practical effect of that is that the Supreme Court has taken away power from the Congress and from states to decide whether and how to regulate money in elections. And so it was that's the key thing, the taking of the power by the court that happened 50 years ago. Only an amendment can correct that because the Supreme Court has said the rules that it has created are constitutionally required. We disagree. We think the court has gotten the law wrong. But when the Supreme Court has said the Constitution requires this, in our view, the only way you change that is the court changes its mind or you amend the Constitution. And In fact, 8 of our existing amendments were responses or corrections to Supreme Court decisions. So this is kind of a tried and true use of the amendment process.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Um, One thing about our amendment is that it doesn't contain any policy. It's purely structural. Some people might be looking for more in amendment. Talk to me about why we designed this amendment not to have policy in it.
Hmm. Oh, that's such a deep question. And honestly, uh, I love to talk with people at an individual level about this because you're right. People, like a lot of times, people will want more. They'll say, oh, well, I think the problem should be tackled in this way. And my response is, well, guess what? If I go to Idaho or I go to Vermont or I go to Massachusetts, you're going to get 1,000 different views on how to tackle the problem of money in politics. And so part of it is the political reality that you could not build a successful amendment coalition around a specific policy because there's not consensus about the policies, right?
Right.
And in fact, we want states to be able to try different things, and we would want Congress to be able to try different things. So instead, you need an amendment that focuses on the structural question of who gets to decide, because then the policy questions are left to the political process. And that diversity, I think, is a virtue of our approach.
Okay, so for our final questions, I want to ask you, like, for the people who have been following along with our movement, what do you think that they should be noticing right now? What do you feel is shifting or changing?
Hmm. Well, I would say because it's an election year as well, um, take a look at how you're seeing political money being spent in your own area, right? Like, are you noticing that the PACs are already spending in the midterms? Are you able to tell where that money is coming from? Um, as they're kind of watching the way election spending is playing out in their own state, we're doing the same thing. We're talking with members of Congress about that. We're talking with state lawmakers about it. And I think if the past 2 elections are any signal, every election cycle just provides another proof point for the need for our amendment because it feels like it's increasingly getting out of control. And then I think the other thing that I would mention, and I know we talked about this a little bit in one of our prior episodes, is you'll see that there are some key industries that are spending a lot of money in elections this year, including the artificial intelligence industry. And I think it's a good indication of these companies realize that influencing elections is an opportunity for them to get the types of policies that serve their interests.
Mm-hmm.
Let's ask ourselves whether those policies will necessarily serve the interests of the American people. And I think it's something we all need to keep an eye on because I think the role of artificial intelligence in our electoral system is going to ramp up as we get closer to November.
So any successful movement, I think, ultimately succeeds because it changes the conversation. Do you think we're changing the conversation over this issue, which is 50 years old this year?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I think like even shortly after Citizens United was decided, what you would hear people talking about a lot is, well, are corporations people? Is money speech? Right?
Right.
They were kind of almost like arguing on the terrain that the Supreme Court had defined. I think our amendment has kind of broken through that frame because now the question that Americans and lawmakers are asking is who should even be deciding whether we want to treat money like speech or whether we want to treat corporations and other artificial entities like people? Like, why do we just assume that the court gets to decide those things? Why not us? What about us? Right. So I think that the American people are kind of really expanding the scope of the question here in a way that I think is going to provide for some political breakthroughs.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been really helpful, and congratulations to you on our 25-state milestone. It's your team that helped get those next few states.
Well, I just have to say, yes, huge congrats to the team, but also congrats to Americans who are getting involved and realizing that, like, actually, this is going to take all of us, and it's not going to be American promise. It's going to be America that gets this done.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you,
Good to chat with
Brian.
you, Jenny.
Good to see you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to Beyond the Headlines. And to learn more about American Promise and the amendment solution we call the For Our Freedom Amendment, just go to americanpromise.net. Thanks again.